Yes, like Frozen is like a psychoeducation, like for children, which just, yeah, amazing.
But also adults too.
Oh, yeah, yes, yeah. Psychoeducation for everyone.
For everyone. Welcome to Psychocinematic, a podcast where we analyse depictions of mental illness and disability in popular films and TV. I'm your host, Stephanie Fornasia. If you love our podcast and want to give us some support, make sure you're following Psychocinematic Podcast on Instagram, TikTok and Twitter. And check out our website, psychocinematicpodcast.com. For access to special bonus content, episodes, early access, stickers, and contribute to our regular fundraisers, join our Patreon. Starting from $3.50 a month, you can be the coolest psychocinematic listener there is. Please note that this episode contains discussions of suicide and self-harm. If this episode brings up anything for you, Lifeline is available on 131114 or the Suicide Callback Service on 1300 659 467. But feel free to skip this one if you prefer. I'd like to start today's podcast by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which I'm on today, which is the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay respects to elders past, present and future, and acknowledge that I'm currently sitting on stolen Aboriginal land. I also just want to start today by acknowledging that I'm releasing this episode the day after Ida Hobbit, which is the International Day Against Homophobia, Biphobia and Transphobia. This is an international day that aims to raise awareness of LGBTQIA+ rights, raise awareness of rights violations, and promote a more inclusive, accepting, and loving society. We at Psychocinematic believe wholeheartedly in trans rights, queer rights, and rights for all minorities and marginalized communities, and are fiercely passionate about improving the lives of LGBTQIA+, particularly youth, across the world. All patron subscriber fees for the month of May will be going to -18 in honour of Ida Hobbit, and we will continue to push for social causes that improve the lives of everyone around us. With that in mind, I'd like to deeply thank our patrons at the moment and shout them out. Nathan Phillips, Elise McGlashan, Matthew Little, Kerry-Ann Ware, Marguerite Donaldson, Carly O'Sullivan, Shannon Threlful Clark, Amber Whitehouse, and someone called Isotransactions. We really appreciate you. And I'd like to introduce to the podcast Laura Pettenuzzo. Is that right?
Pettenuzzo, yep, that's right.
Thank you very much for joining me on the podcast today, Laura. And what land are you on today?
I'm on the lands of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people, and I'd just like to affirm that this always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Sovereignty was never ceded and a treaty has never been signed. I guess as non-Indigenous people, it is super important for us to just, acknowledge that we are on stolen land and to kind of display our allyship, not just with our words, but also with our actions.
Hugely true. Thank you very much for that. So I'd just like to introduce Laura. So Laura is a writer and disability advocate living, as she just said, in Wurundjeri country. Her work has been published in places including the Mascara Literary Review, the ABC and the SBS. And she's also a member of the Victorian Disability Advisory Council. Welcome and thank you so much for being on the podcast today, Laura.
Thank you so much. I'm very excited to be here.
Is there anything else you wanted to share about, I guess, what led you to coming onto the podcast and why you thought you might be a good fit to talk?
Absolutely. So I guess I just love the idea of this podcast in the sense that, representation of mental health and disability is one of the things about which I'm most passionate. When I heard about the podcast and started listening, I was like, oh my God, this is brilliant. Like, it ticks all my boxes. And I guess because a lot of my work and advocacy is around, mental health or psychosocial disability and, writing about representation and, disabled people not being seen in, either the media or in leadership positions or just in life, and how that idea of not being seen then kind of snowballs into, all different kinds of ableist attitudes that we experience. That just kind of led me to go, hang on, I have thoughts. I have lots of thoughts and lots of feelings. And so I guess for me, bit of a spoiler, like, which you would know from the episode title, but we're going to be talking about Frozen, and that has been my favorite Disney film since I first saw it because of its depiction of mental illness. And so I guess it was just a really nice alignment of things about which I'm passionate.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you reached out because, yes, your work is just perfect, and the things that you're passionate about are very much the things I'm passionate about too. We are doing Frozen today, and I'm really, really excited that you chose this one because I've been wanting to do it for a while, and I did make a little TikTok about its representation maybe like a year ago, but I was like, I'm going to do a full episode at some point. So thank you so much for picking Frozen. What was it about Frozen that you were so drawn to it?
Yeah, so I think for me, it was a couple of things. So I wanted to see the movie before I really knew what it was about, purely because I'm a really big fan of Demi Lovato. And so they sing the Let It Go, like the radio version. And so I listened to that song as soon as it came out, and I was like, oh my God, like I really relate to these lyrics. Like, wow, amazing. And so I was like, okay, I really want to see the film. And I remember when I saw it, I was in America with a friend. It was like 2013, end of the year. And I'd been experiencing a fair bit of like anxiety and depression at the time. And I was struggling to articulate that to the friend that I was with. And then I remember just sitting in that theater and just crying because I was like, oh my God, like what else is going through? That's what I'm going through. And so when we left the movie theater, I said to my friend, I feel like Elsa at the moment. Like that's what's going on for me. And that kind of helped her understand where I was at. And I guess, yeah, that from then on, it's just kind of become my comfort film because it's been somewhere that I can go, that I know that I can feel seen. But not only do I feel seen in terms of Elsa's experience of mental health challenges, it's also a comforting reminder or reassurance or I guess hope that much as like Anna sees Elsa in all her complexity and loves her just as much, that people can see me in all my complexity, in all my mental illness and love me too.
That's beautiful. That's also what I really love about this film as well. I didn't actually watch it until a little while, like many years after it came out, and I was in private practice working with kids, and a few kids brought up that for dealing with anxiety and depression, one of their mantras was "Let It Go," the song.
Aww.
And so I was like, "That's great, use that. That's amazing." So I was like, "I've got to watch this movie." So obviously been really helpful for some of the kids that I work with. And then once I watched it, I was like, oh yeah, like, I can see why this is so beloved. And I'm just so happy because like I think Inside Out came around the same time, which I'm gonna have to cover at some point.
Yes, definitely. I'm very excited for that too.
Yeah, I've got a few people who really want to do it with me, so I've just like got to pick. But yeah, just I love that Disney's starting to bring out, or has been doing it for a while at least, a lot more films that aren't about like the fairy tale ending and the romance. It's more about actual useful messages, particularly for kids that are going through tough times, that can actually be used really effectively for teaching kids, not just like morals, but also just how to deal with this very strange world that you're in and this very flawed brain that we all have. And they're also often very female-led, which I love as well.
Yes. And like, you know, it's been such a long time coming. And I think, yeah, like there are so many things that I do love about Frozen, and I know we'll get to this later, but, you know, the fact that it isn't romantic love that saves Elsa, too, is again just kind of subverting that idea and means that it was, for its time, quite a groundbreaking feels dramatic and maybe too much, but I'm going to say it because for me, as I watched it, it felt groundbreaking.
Yeah, I think that's a good word to use because it was so popular too.
Yes.
Even though people are probably sick of the songs by now, they have not stopped being popular. Like I think they're timeless, and it's just Disney songs are often very well written, but it's a really good signal for how groundbreaking something is when it's still so popular. Well, should I just briefly attempt to go through the plot? So anyone who hasn't watched Frozen, although hopefully you have by now, know what we're talking about. So Anna and Elsa are princesses of Arendelle. Elsa has magic powers to make things freeze and create snow and ice. She accidentally strikes Anna while playing when they're little, and their parents go to the trolls to save Anna, who remove all memories of the magic but leaves the fun. As a result, Elsa shuts herself away at the suggestion of her parents and barely sees her sister as she grows up, also shutting the gates to the kingdom. The parents go away on a trip and are shipwrecked, and sadly have died at sea. As they become of age, Elsa is coronated. They open the gates and have the ceremony, and Anna is so excited to have people in the kingdom dreaming of finding her true love. It also leaves other kingdoms keen to take advantage, such as Weaseltown. Anna meets Hans and immediately hits it off, and her and Elsa start to connect for the first time. However, when Hans proposes to Anna and she says yes, it causes an argument between the sisters, and Elsa's powers are released in front of all. Elsa escapes the castle, then turns everything to winter. She's alone with her powers and creates a new ice castle, singing the iconic Let It Go, where she releases all of her feelings and hence her powers. Anna lets Hans be in charge of Arendelle and sets off to find Elsa, running into Kristoff and his reindeer Sven, who she bribes to help her get to the North Mountain, which Elsa has turned into her home. I think I have missed here that Arendelle has frozen over as she's escaped it. As they get closer, they meet Olaf, which has been created by Elsa, a playmate she created when they were little, whom Anna remembers. They finally get there, and Anna tries to convince her to come back, of which Elsa just tells her to go home. And Anna tells her what's happened there. Elsa gets emotional and her powers strike Anna's heart. An ice monster chases them away, and Anna's hair starts to turn whiter. She's starting to freeze. Kristoff and Anna start to bond, and he introduces them to his troll family, who check out Anna's frozen heart and says that an act of true love is the only thing that will save her. Hans goes to get Elsa, and his men capture her. Kristoff attempts to take Anna back to Arendelle, hoping that the kiss from her fiancé, Hans, will save her. But just as Hans is about to kiss her, he reveals that he was just wanting to marry into a throne and took advantage of Anna's desperation. His plan is to let Anna die and kill Elsa. But Elsa escapes and creates more and more of a snowstorm. Sven convinces Kristoff to go back. Olaf rescues Anna and tries to take her to Kristoff. Hans catches up with Elsa and tells her her sister has died because of her. This stops the snowstorm. Anna sees Hans about to kill Elsa and then runs in the middle and freezes, preventing Elsa's death. She then unfreezes. The act of true love was that between two sisters. Elsa then feels all that love and unthaws everything, bringing back the summer. Anna then, very satisfactorily, punches Hans off the edge. Olaf gets his own personal flurry so he can exist in the summer. And Elsa is able to control her powers and creates a giant ice skating rink. I've just summarised Frozen 1, which I assume we'll just be talking mostly about today. I haven't actually seen Frozen 2. I was trying to, but I never got around to it.
Oh, you must. Okay, yes. Yes, whole other discussion. Although they do kind of go into like the mental health elements in there a little bit. And there is one of the songs where Kristen Bell actually did an interview where she talked about how that song was actually drawn from her experiences of depression. But anyway, sorry, I'm going on a tangent.
No, that's really important, and feel free to discuss Frozen 2 as it comes up as well, because it's hard to not talk about one without the other. So I did a little bit of research into the lived experience of the people creating the film, but before I go into what I discovered, is there anything that you've come across or that you wanted to talk about in terms of the creation of Frozen?
I did a bit of like looking into it when I first watched it, and also, in preparation for this. And I think, we would have come across some of like similar things, but, like I mentioned, I appreciated the fact that the filmmakers like deliberately approached Demi Lovato to sing the radio version because they're well known as like a mental health advocate. And so like, I guess that, active platforming of lived experience is something that in general I think the whole world can and should learn from, because the voices of people with lived experience remain marginalized and sidelined. But on that note, you know, like Kristen Bell has obviously spoken out about her own experiences with mental health issues.
Yeah, she's been very vocal.
Yes. Yeah, like I am like quite disappointed with, and I don't mean to mispronounce Idina Menzel's name, but like really disappointed with like she made a couple of jokes in 2017 and a few years ago about like suicide and just kind of being very flippant about that.
Yeah.
And it was just kind of like, Elsa, don't do that. Like,
what are you doing, Elsa?
I know.
Don't you know what you represent to everyone?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't realize that until you had mentioned it. And yeah, just like I won't repeat what she said because it's really quite
yeah,
upsetting. And given what she's come through in the show, but also like I read that one of her parents was a therapist and her husband's a mental health worker. So
wow,
should she not have known better than to make some of that kind of offhand comment, which really trivializes the nature of mental illness? She did apologize, though, I guess. Do you think her apology was enough, or should she do more?
Personally, I think she should definitely do more. But I mean, I'm slightly, you know, I have like, I'm very invested in this issue. But I think it's particularly the fact that it's a recurring thing. Like I read several interviews with her from like different time points where she made like the same or similar flippant comments about mental health and suicide. And I just kind of went, did you not learn? You know, her bunch of her fans, like, you know, there was like a bunch of backlash from them, but it's kind of like, why do you need like a huge like public outcry for you to recognize the like implications and problematic nature of your own behavior? Like, can we not like reflect on our words and behavior as people and then own up to our mistakes? I don't know.
Yeah, that's the disappointing thing. Like it took a group of people, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, who called her out to actually go, oh yeah, that was wrong. Like,
yes,
there was plenty of time to reflect and go, oh, I can see why that wouldn't have been the right thing to say.
So yeah, I don't know. I just have a lot of feelings about that. Yeah, I think, you know, nobody's perfect. We're all human, and perhaps it can be, you know, viewed as an opportunity for grace, and as an opportunity to do that introspective work, and do better in future.
Yeah, anything else that you came across or that you want to talk about?
That is everything off the top of my head, aside from the fact that I do remember seeing on Google that, good old Google, Josh Gad, ironically has like generalized anxiety disorder, or GAD, just like me.
Yes. Me too.
Oh my God, GAD twinsies.
GAD twins. We need a secret handshake.
Oh my God, yes.
We'll have to wash our hands afterwards. Anyway.
And just, yeah, like, lots of reassurance, like, you know, I did the handshake, that means that I like you, it's okay, we can all be reassured.
Deep breaths.
Yes, yeah. That can be an element of the handshake, mindful breathing.
Yes, 100%. Love it. Yeah, I came across that as well, in like such a coincidence with his name, but also he's been very vocal about it and campaigned for mental health awareness in a few forms over the years. So that's really awesome that he. It sounds like there's been a few people with lived experience in this film who were perfect for the roles and, you know, have the amazing voices for it, but also really, I think, probably really brought the character to life through their lived experience as well. I think you can kind of tell, and particularly when they talk about how passionate they are about it, like you mentioned with Kristen Bell talking about the song.
So the one in Frozen 2 is The Next Right Thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that song.
I need to listen to it.
Oh my God, it's like one of the most played on my Spotify, like, yeah.
So yeah, using her own experiences to influence the film as well, which is really awesome. I also had a little research into some of the other actors. So Santino Fontana, who I just love because he's in Crazy Ex-Girlfriend.
Yes.
Yeah, I didn't read much about his own life, like personal experience with mental illness per se, but he did have quite a significant onstage concussion in his early Broadway career, which set him back a whole year professionally. So he experienced a lot of distress and stress, and I assume it sounds like it was quite anxiety-provoking moment, like knowing if he was going to recover, like he couldn't perform for some time. So that was just interesting, and he had to really look after himself and I guess provide accommodations for him when he was going back to work. So that's important to be aware of. And then Jonathan Groff, who plays I always forget that, Christoph.
Oh, yeah.
He has discussed publicly about his life being in the closet and coming out sort of later in life as gay, particularly being very passionate about Broadway, and then once coming out, really changing his life. So I think he probably relates to that sort of masking side of things, of looking like you've got it all together and there's nothing different about you, but secretly you're not being your true self. So yeah, just thought that was interesting.
Yes, I think so too, particularly given like when I was like first Googling Frozen and like different interpretations of Let It Go, there were quite a few arguments or like people contending that it could also be like an analogy for queerness.
Yeah.
And like obviously they didn't kind of go in that direction in either the first or the second film, but I could really see you know, that like that parallel really does make sense.
Hugely, yeah.
If, you know, people having that interpretation, if that's going to help, if that's going to you know, support people to find that sense of self-acceptance, then that's brilliant. And it's just, you know, another way that the film and the lyrics and, you know, all of that lived experience that's gone into it can and will continue to, I guess, improve the lives of people who watch it. And maybe that is a long bow, but this film has improved my life. So
I don't think that's a long bow at all, and I feel like that's the best thing about cinema. Particularly, I always like when films are explicit about what mental illness, disability, whatever it might be that they're talking about. But when it is kind of more coded, it means that you can, and even when it's not, you can take with it what works for you and what helps you and apply it to your life in so many different ways. And I think particularly with Elsa not having a romantic plot in the first one, haven't seen the second one, then it's very easy to connect it with having a queer narrative as well, which if people have taken that on board, that's brilliant. I had a little research into the creator Jennifer Lee, who is now the chief creative officer. I wrote CO there, and now I don't remember what it stands for.
She's the chief of something.
She's the chief of Disney. So she took over from John Lasseter when there were those allegations of assault, and he was let go, which I think is a great move because like this, she did such an amazing job with this film, and it's good to have a female in that role.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I just read a few articles saying that she really struggled with self-doubt when she was growing up. She's also experienced quite significant grief as her boyfriend was killed in a boating accident when she was in junior year of college. And she's sort of used those experiences of grief, but also that self-doubt and then thinking, I can't doubt anymore because life is short, to creating this kind of film. And she also said that she was raised by a single mum, a nurse who worked 3 jobs, and she was bullied and took a lot of comfort in stories, which helped her sort of develop some mental toughness as well. And her favourite story was Cinderella. She thought the biggest thing was that she was so mistreated, but she was able to say, it's not you, it's not me, it's you, and hold on to her strength. Which is great because when I think of Cinderella, I think of being rescued by a prince. So it's another example of people taking messages from films that are really helpful, even if others might not see that.
And I guess that a reframe is always possible. And that it ultimately, perspective is everything. Cliche as it might seem.
Yeah, for sure. I also had a little look into like the inspiration some of the inspiration for Frozen, which is the story The Snow Queen by Hans Christian Andersen. Have you read it or seen anything?
have not. I remember reading that, like, in the initial, like, planning of Frozen, that Elsa was going to be the villain, and
Mm,
that they really kind of went another way. And I'm really, really glad that they did, because it
yeah.
kind of, there isn't necessarily like, I mean, if we had to pick a villain, it would be Hans, but the fact that there isn't like an easily pinpointable villain in this film, I guess, is a testament to the complexity of life. Like, sometimes it's not like it's not a clear cut black and white, you know, you're good, you're evil. It's, you
Mm,
know, in this case, you know, Elsa is not the villain. She's just experiencing something really intense, and hasn't been given the support that she needs to kind of deal with that or manage that, or to use the, you know, the clinical term, so to speak, to regulate. um,
yes.
and so I think, in terms of the Snow Queen and how the film ultimately deviated, like, I'm really
Mm.
pleased that it did. But yeah, I'm keen to hear more about your thoughts on, like, you know, the origin with the Snow Queen and stuff too.
Yeah, that's a really good point because I think with a lot of more recent Disney films too, that there isn't good and bad. There's no
Mm-hmm.
evil and perfection. It's all very nuanced, and there are flaws in everyone. Like
Mm-hmm.
there are flaws in Anna because she
Yeah.
is very she's too trusting, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
of
Yeah.
Hans. But then she ultimately saves the day, but it's more of a group effort as well. And
Mm-hmm.
I just love that it's more true to life, like you say, because even the power isn't the villain as well, because it's good,
Mm.
it creates great things as well as
Yes.
harmful things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think, you know, what the film shows is not only like Elsa's lived experience as someone with the mental illness or psychosocial disability, it also demonstrates the impact that psychosocial disability or mental illness can have on the loved ones of someone who has that
Yes,
mental illness.
yes, yeah.
And, you know, you kind of see Anna falling into that kind of caring role,
Mm,
in the sense that, you know, she's reaching out, and she's being rebuffed. And I
mm,
think, you know, there are a lot of people who, you know, might not necessarily identify as carers, because that can be quite a loaded term,
mm,
but could identify with that act of trying to provide emotional support for someone who is dealing with their own mental ill health. And yeah, so I
definitely.
guess I really appreciated that there was that representation there as
Yeah,
well.
absolutely. Yeah, there's so
Mm-hmm.
much. It just really nails it.
Yeah.
Going back to the Snow Queen, so it's a
Mm-hmm.
really long story,
Mm-hmm.
and I haven't read it or watched any depictions of it on
Mm-hmm.
screen. I think like I recall the Snow Queen as one of the what I think it's the White Queen in the Chronicles of Narnia, which I've only seen the
Yes,
movie.
that's what pops into my head too. Mm.
Yeah, which they also it was inspired by this tale. But
Yeah.
essentially like there's like five different stories within it and lots of
Mm-hmm.
things happen and it's really the Snow Queen doesn't she doesn't actually pop up all the way through. So
Mm-hmm.
I won't go into it. But one thing that I thought was really important is the beginning of the tale
Mm-hmm.
is the whole creation of the story is that apparent this is a quote from the story that
Yeah.
or maybe it's from Wikipedia. Anyway, the devil, in the form of an evil troll, has made a magic mirror that distorts the appearance of everything that it reflects. The
Mm-hmm.
magic mirror fails to reflect the good and beautiful aspects of people and things and magnifies their bad and ugly aspects. The devil, who's
Mm.
a headmaster at a troll school, takes the mirror and his pupils throughout the world, delighting in using it to distort everyone and everything. They attempt to carry the mirror into heaven in order to make fools of the angels and God, but the higher they lift it, the more the mirror shakes as they laugh, and it slips from their grasp and falls back to earth, shattering into billions of pieces, some no larger than a grain of sand. The splinters are blown by the wind all over the earth and get into people's hearts and eyes, freezing their hearts like blocks of ice and making their eyes like the troll mirror itself, seeing only the bad and ugly in people and things. And to me, that there is just depression and anxiety encapsulated.
Mm-hmm.
Well, at least one aspect of it, anyway, in that
Yes.
some
Mm-hmm.
of those unhelpful thought patterns, those cognitive biases that you experience, which is,
Yes.
magnifying the bad and ignoring the good or seeing only threat when there is no threat there and things like that.
Absolutely. And I think also, in some ways, that sense of like having kind of like mirrors or um, like a shutter, I guess, over that distorts the way we see the world could also lead into like the apathy that Elsa feels,
Yes.
and which we know is also a key or can be a key part of depression. And then might also lead to, say, for instance, the way that we interpret our surroundings. So we see that, like, Elsa feels a lot of guilt and shame. And so, for the characters in like the Snow Queen stories who, have those bits of glass or those, I guess, lenses through which they see the world, those feelings of guilt and shame would also be amplified. So yeah, there really are, I guess, like crumbs or like grains of that story, scattered throughout or embedded within, to use the more appropriate term, embedded within Frozen.
Yeah, I just thought that was really interesting and amazing that that concept has really, this was, I think, 1800s, late
Mm.
1800s, has really come to light hundreds of years later. It's just
Mm-hmm.
pretty amazing.
Yes, stories are brilliant.
Yes. And I've always liked Hans Christian Andersen's tales. Like, they were always a little bit dark. Like, Little Mermaid, the original story, is much darker than the Disney film.
I haven't actually read any of the original Hans Christian Andersen's. I think I need to.
I won't spoil them for you, but yeah, some of his stories are a little bit not yeah, they've made them a little bit more palatable for this century. So go back and read. Very interesting. But on that note, Hans Christian Andersen, the
Mm-hmm.
author of the
Mm-hmm.
original Snow Queen, has been widely speculated as queer,
Mm-hmm. Oh.
possibly gay, but he might have been bi. We don't
Mm-hmm.
know. There's written evidence of him having relationships and being in love with men, but it
Mm-hmm.
depends on the researcher as to whether they will admit that or not, that he was actually queer. So it's very
Mm-hmm.
interesting. I'd like to do more
Yeah.
research on that. But he was described as experiencing depression, particularly as he was abused in boarding school. I'm absolutely certain his experiences would be coming through in his stories in
Yeah.
lots of ways. I think some people have compared The Little Mermaid to particularly like the latest kind of iteration of a Mer story, Luca, if you've seen
Mm-hmm.
that one. Of
No, I
It's a great
haven't.
film. The sort of concept of wanting to be part of another person's world and having to hide who
Mm-hmm.
you are, which would be very much an analogy of being queer as well, particularly
Yeah.
of the time that Hans was around in. So yeah.
Okay, now I really want to watch Luca, and I want to go back and rewatch The Little Mermaid.
More Disney films, yes, please.
Yes.
So yeah, I think that's all the lived experience I came across. Was there anything else that anyone involved that I've missed or?
I don't think so. Not from my knowledge anyway. But I think we can safely say that, like several significant players or people who were involved in the film, in various ways brought their lived experience. And at least for
Definitely.
me, like when I watched it, that really shone through, like particularly in like the lyrics of, like, say, Let It Go, or even for the first time in forever, particularly the reprise, like when like Anna sings it to Elsa, or I suppose they sing it to each other in the ice castle. That one also really struck a chord with me in terms of its representation.
So are you happy for us to move on to accuracy?
Yeah, no worries.
Because sometimes we kind of go through like, is this an accurate representation according to what we see clinically? But I just thought we'd probably talk about the themes in it and how much they relate to what we've experienced or what we think they're trying to say.
Yeah.
So I guess, a big part of the themes is dealing with emotions, but particularly very strong emotions, such as depression and anxiety. Having any kind of mental illness experience would probably fit within this film, but it could also be seen, like we were saying, as a LGBTQI A plus storyline, so hiding who you are as a person in terms of sexuality or gender. Is there any other themes that you would particularly like to talk about, or within that?
Maybe like a grace and redemption, and that idea of like love and the fact that it can be like unconditional, in the sense that, like Anna continued to like fight for Elsa even when Elsa ran away, even when Elsa like pushed her away. Like Anna didn't give up, and I think that the strength of that familial bond, and the notion that family, whether it's by birth or by choice, because obviously for Elsa and Anna it was by birth, but thinking of like, Kristoff and Sven, family by choice, those bonds are the things that can save us and help us, and ultimately are what get us through.
Yeah.
And so I think I also really appreciated that reinforcement of the fact that we don't exist in isolation. We all exist as part of constellations, even if, as in Elsa's case, our mental illnesses might be so much easier to believe otherwise, that's a lie. And this film demonstrated that through Elsa's story, which I really, really appreciate.
Yeah, definitely. I think that is a really important point too, that unconditional love and support, regardless of how that person might have inadvertently hurt you, or it might not be the outcome of that support might not be what you want. Like, for example, Kristoff knowing that Anna needed her true love's kiss to save her wasn't, even though he was definitely like, Hans is, like marrying Hans is a bad idea, and also he obviously has a crush on her. That all goes out the window because it's all about saving her, and regardless of who ends up kissing her, he just wants her to live. So that, I think, just that, even though it's a very brief part of the film, is like such an important thing of what true love and support is.
Yes. And I think it also, that notion that sometimes it can be sacrificial, also harkens back to that idea of Olaf saying, some people are worth melting for. In much the same way that,
So
in order to save her, I know. So like in much the same way that, Kristoff, in order to save Anna, had to let her go. Olaf was aware that by letting Anna, when Hans had trapped her in the room, in order to get her out, like it would involve potentially sacrificing himself. Olaf was willing to do that. So I think that was also really quite powerful.
I think it speaks to me as being a parent as well, because we often, a lot of us have experiences of not unconditional love with parenting, or having there's a lot of stuff I often end up reading up on about like narcissistic parenting, or I'm working in a space where there's a lot of kids who have been abused by their parents now in my career. So seeing what that actual unconditional love looks like is really important, in that you would just do everything for that person, even if it causes some damage to yourself. Having said that, of course, you should look after yourself as well.
Yes. I guess there is that kind of balance. But like it is a film for children, and that nuance of like balancing self-care and love for other people would be tricky, I think, for any film to capture, let alone one with such a young target audience. But yes, I guess that that notion of love is just kind of, I think, one of the reasons why perhaps the film is so beloved, because it is such a universal yearning that we all have, and something that as humans, we not just deserve to be loved. We are loved as we are. Like there's not like criteria or conditions that we need to meet. It's just kind of, as Anna's I guess behavior or sacrifices for Elsa demonstrate, that love is a gift that we can choose to accept or not. And the, I guess, the flow-on effects of accepting that love are beneficial and enormous, not just for ourselves, but for those who love us, and those that we love.
Definitely. I'm going to talk about this now because it's perfect segue, but I guess the juxtaposition of that with Hans, and he, like, it's such a perfect metaphor for the person you meet who thinks they're promising you the world, and then which I'm sure we've all come across if we've been in the dating pool, and they just seem too good to be true, and you finish each other's sentences, and they tell you that they love you very quickly, but then it's not the way it's panned out. And often people can think that sort of initial rush and like everything happens really, really quickly is love. But in the case of Hans and Anna, it was fake on his part, but also because she's her experience of romantic love is so like pretty much non-existent because she's been sort of shut up in Arendelle for so long, and she's at that age where she's yearning to meet someone. She probably interprets that as that's love. But then the actual reality of that is no, like he's been taking advantage of her desire to connect, which often can happen to people who are very vulnerable to that. I guess it's a good teaching moment to to have boundaries as well and get to know someone carefully, and not always trust people immediately, and to show like what true love really is not necessarily that initial spark, but really that, like we've just been talking about, that sort of unconditional love and support of that person for who they are, not just what they can give you, I guess.
And I think something else that distinguishes, I guess, like the Hans dynamic from those other more healthy depictions is the ease of it. So like for Anna, perhaps she kind of thought, oh my God, like it's all falling into place. Like, this is the person, like it's all just, it's easy. But it wasn't necessarily easy. With Christoph and Sven, it's not easy with Elsa, but it doesn't have to be easy to be worth it. It's almost, the ruptures in their relationships mean that the repairs afterwards make them that much stronger.
100%. That's the reality. It's not all just ease and having fun,
sunshine and rainbows.
Exactly. It's also lots of hard work and managing through the tough times, not just the easy times. I really love that storyline, and particularly how Christoph is like, you just got engaged to someone you just met, which was like the opposite of Disney lore for such a long time. So I guess I was kind of interested in the way there's like parallels to how people might attempt to manage mental illness, particularly for Elsa in the beginning. And I really, the way that it sort of pans out in the beginning when the trolls are telling her parents, like, she has to learn to control it and fear will be her enemy. They sort of interpret that to mean you just have to stop using it. Just try to not focus on it.
Conceal it, basically.
Conceal, don't feel. And they kind of interpret it, to me, like those words could have been interpreted as manage it, like, and also don't be afraid of it, because the more you're afraid of it, then the harder it will be to manage it. Which is just like with anxiety.
Exactly. That idea of fear being your enemy is almost saying, like, but acceptance will be your savior. And ultimately that's what it is. But I think what happens then is that, like, Elsa and Anna's parents are so well intentioned and they obviously love their daughters so much. And that love then leads them to, I guess, constantly kind of repress Elsa's emotions. They view, like, the expression of those emotions as something bad, as something to be avoided at all costs. And so then, I guess, therefore, neither of them learn how to regulate their emotions or learn that having emotions is okay.
Yeah, exactly. They're completely well-meaning and they just don't want anything more bad to happen. Inadvertently end up making her powers more strong and not giving her any skills to manage it. And yeah, like you say, I think it's just a perfect metaphor for parents with kids with mental illness who they themselves don't know how to manage. You know,
Mm-hmm.
that they might have their own mental illness, that they haven't learnt ways to manage, which is all can be very intergenerational as well, and not knowing what to do. And that's a very common experience. And it also shows it doesn't mean they didn't care or love or, you know,
Mm-hmm.
would do anything for their kids. They just didn't have the skills.
Yeah.
And then when they die because of the shipwreck, all of Elsa's supports are gone, and she
Yes.
just has nothing to help support her powers. But then
Mm-hmm.
yet she still now has the responsibility of being queen. So
Yes.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
which can happen. Like as your kids grow up and they sort of learn ways to cope that aren't necessarily managing their symptoms, but maybe masking symptoms or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
unless they sort of realize what's going on and how they actually need those strategies, it
Yeah.
can get worse, I
Yeah, that's
guess.
true.
Can I throw a question in here, if that's okay?
Please do. I love questions.
What, and feel free to talk about anything in this context, but in terms of
Yeah.
your experience with generalized anxiety disorder, how
Mm-hmm.
did you learn ways to manage it? Like, what was your journey like with that acceptance?
Yeah, sure. So that journey for me is still very much ongoing.
It never
It's
ends.
no, it really doesn't. For me, some things that really helped were just kind of like I started keeping a thought diary when I was like in my later years of high school, because I realized like it was like at the end of year 11 and the start of year 12 that I was kind of like, if I just keep believing all of these anxious thoughts, like all of these self-loathing, self-defeating thoughts, content warning, but like I will end up like, you know, the only like inevitable, I guess, solution feels like taking my own life, and I don't want to do that. So I have to put a stop to this now. And so I have to kind of like take a really hard look at my thoughts, and what they're doing to me. And so it was very much like I started talking to myself as though I was a really young child. Like I had these really like they're not young anymore, but like my cousins who were quite young at the time, and I was like, Laura, would you talk to them the way you talk to yourself? And like I would never do that, and I wouldn't want them to talk to themselves the way that I was talking to myself. So for me, it was just very much like a moment to moment. Oh, okay. Now I'm having this feeling. Like it's okay that I'm having this feeling. Maybe I'm having this feeling for this reason. Maybe I don't know why I'm having the feeling, but even so, that's okay too. And just kind of acknowledging for the first time that my emotions, whatever they were valid. And I think that they didn't have to be contingent on anybody else's emotions. Like it didn't matter whether someone else's feelings like might have seemed bigger than mine. It didn't matter. Like I didn't need to like, I guess, compare myself or think, oh no, like that other person's got it worse. Like we we don't experience the world through a barometer of what everyone else is feeling. We
Mm,
experience it, you know, through our own interpretations and experiences, which is a very long-winded way of saying that I guess for me, starting dialectical behavior therapy was really, really helpful. And
mm,
I was, and I'm very lucky that my parents supported me to do that when I was a teenager.
that's
And
fantastic.
yes, DBT is something that I would recommend to lots of people just because it does equip you with so many skills
Mm.
in identifying your emotions, in regulating them and tolerating distress, and in interacting more effectively with other people. So yeah, for me, DBT has definitely been life changing,
Mm.
and the skills that I was able to gain through that are skills that I continue to use when I do notice, you know, my anxiety spiking, or like my thoughts starting to become quite self-defeating.
I think that's going to be really helpful for anyone who's experiencing, you know, some of the things that they relate to from this
Mm-hmm.
movie. because I haven't myself gone through dialectical behavior therapy, but definitely aspects like the acceptance side,
Yeah.
the mindfulness aspect of it,
Mhm.
because that's quite a suite of strategies that you learn, and it's
Mhm.
really really beneficial for lots of people. I've heard really, really good things about it. There's really good research about it. But yeah, the way you're describing, I'm noticing that I'm having the feeling. And what would you say to yourself if you were your cousin? Is
Mhm.
some really good sort of, I guess, defusing strategies of acknowledging that this is a feeling, this is a thought. It's not good or bad. It's just there, and
Yeah.
it's not
Mhm.
you. Your brain does this, but it
Yeah.
doesn't have to become, it's a way to sort of disconnect from it, I guess, a little bit but as well as giving it space to be there as well.
Mhm.
It takes a lot of practice, but it's
Yes.
really helpful.
Yeah, and I guess also that idea that like just because our anxiety might be saying, we might be having an urge as a consequence of our anxiety, to like engage in a maladaptive behavior, like whatever that behavior might be. It's kind of like, oh, okay, I don't have to act on that urge.
Yeah, yeah,
I can just be like, oh, okay, anxiety is telling me to do this thing now, but actually I'm aware that that thing won't be helpful. So instead, I'm going to, for me, it might be call my nonna, make a cup of tea. I'm going to take opposite action,
yeah.
essentially.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Going back to the fear being your worst enemy, because what can
Yes.
often happen with anxiety disorders is the more we are afraid of those symptoms and try to ignore them, the stronger they can become.
Mm-hmm.
And a perfect way to end up with the diagnosis of panic disorder, which is something I had when I was very little,
Mm-hmm.
is that you become your anxiety just keeps being fed, and you end up
Mm-hmm.
in quite a state of anxiety that just keeps building until it sort of reduces, as it does do.
Mm-hmm.
So so that's why those strategies are really helpful.
Yes, and I think that was also something that the film demonstrated in, the scene when Elsa was very much panicking when, like,
Mm,
she'd
mm.
hit Anna. And, like, they demonstrated that in, when they were singing the reprise of For the First Time in Forever. And, the music was building to a crescendo. And, Elsa was just like I can't. Like, you could
Yeah,
just hear absolute overwhelm. And so it was the tone of her voice, it was her body language, it was the lighting that they used in the shot. Like, it was red as opposed to like the serene blue of the ice. Like, it was, yeah, I think they really articulated depicted that sense of panic and that extreme just overwhelm, and how you can't kind of see past the immediacy of the panic or the
yeah.
immediacy of your emotion.
And you just want to
um
escape from it
Yes.
and ignore it,
Mhm.
that it's just not going to go away.
Yep.
Yeah. Even the little things like when she's in a coronation and she's trying to hold the staff and everything, and she's just
Yes.
like so stressed out, and you can really feel it, and
Mhm.
trying to not let her powers show, and obviously it doesn't quite work out. But I also feel like the gloves and covering
Yes.
powers is also a bit of a metaphor for masking, which you can apply
Mhm.
in many different ways, which I just really liked that little analogy as well.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, I think her body language in so many different like parts of the film was really really telling. Like
Mm,
that, sense of absolutely, like, she was so closed off,
mm,
when she was a kid and when she was in her room, or even when they were with the trolls. Like, she was very much, like hunched over, like,
mm.
wringing her hands. Whereas in Let It Go, like her hair was always like tightly, in a tight bun, like
Yeah,
everything tightly controlled. Whereas she very much let everything go in the
yeah.
sense of, yeah.
And she's got her arms all splayed out, and she's,
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
just
Hmm.
letting it all go. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, the open body language. Yeah, I guess everything it reflects that. I guess the biological like underpinnings and repercussions of that anxiety and the lack of it, and the liberation that can come when you do find that acceptance, however you find it.
Mm.
Um, Yeah. Although I will just add that I don't know what you thought about the placement of the song Let It Go in the film, but it's always really annoyed me because it's like at that point in the film, her freedom was conditional. She
Mm.
was free with the caveat or proviso that she was alone.
Yes, yes.
So, whereas, true freedom and acceptance came later when she was like,
Mm.
hang on, I'm allowed to express all of these emotions and accept love from the people who care about me. Like, I don't have to, I guess, isolate myself.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because I have similar thoughts because like the song is such an anthem for letting go of
Yeah.
your sort of hang-ups and being
Hmm.
yourself and being free to be yourself and
Hmm.
take off the mask and just allow like don't not care what people say.
Hmm.
But it's in a point where she's actually pushed everyone away and she's frozen everyone out
Hmm.
essentially.
Yes.
um and everything's not, there's a relentless winter that
Hmm.
affects everybody. So yeah, I'm also like, it's a bit confusing in that
Hmm.
way, and particularly when it's become such an anthem, but it's in a bit where it's actually great for her to let herself go, but it's also at the detriment. And it's like you say, conditional because she also doesn't have the support around her.
Hmm.
I guess it's a journey for her because she's tried so hard to mask and not have the powers, and now she's
Hmm.
going through the I guess the step in the journey of just letting herself feel the feelings and be herself.
Yeah.
And I think often we can go through a journey with that, with things like anxiety, mental illness, with also neuro variances as well. And I guess it's also learning what else you need from that as well. Because
Mm.
while she wants to isolate herself, which might feel like the right thing to do for her,
Hmm.
she's also, what I sort of see is her ending up, going back to, Arundel and everything that happens next is there's also that values conflict within her. She
Hmm.
wants to be herself finally, but also her values are that she loves her family. She's got loyalty.
Hmm.
She wants to carry on her family's legacy, and she's also, has that sense of honor and servitude. So it's hard, like if isolation was going to be completely within her sort of value set, if that makes sense, of what she
Yeah.
wanted from her life, then that would be fine. But she
Yeah.
couldn't be in that state forever. So she was able to express those emotions in a positive way and create this amazing castle and create Olaf and this beautiful dress and be
Hmm.
herself. But she also needed to learn how to manage that in order to save her family, save Arundel, and yeah, I guess balance that life as well, which I guess is a
Mm.
really good lesson in a way.
Yes. And I guess I think you really hit the nail on the head in terms of like she wasn't really living according to her values
Mm.
until she went back. Yeah, I think yeah that really encapsulates that notion quite effectively.
Forgive my misremembering. Is values work a bit of a part of dialectical behavior therapy as well?
At least for me, in my experience, yes. Like it's very much how I understand. So, like, say experiences of guilt
Mm-hmm.
come from like when you're not acting in accordance with your values, and so to kind of, I guess, remedy that or like fix a mistake. It's kind of about reflecting on okay, how did I not act in accordance with my values and how could I in future or how can I now act in a way that aligns with my values?
Mm-hmm. So it's also like this show is a metaphor for therapy as
Yes.
well, which I love.
Yes. Have you seen like the actual like the Broadway musical that was in Melbourne?
No, no.
Ah,
If my
okay.
son was a little bit older, I probably would have brought him, but he's only just got into these kinds of films. So
Ah,
yeah.
okay. Hopefully it'll come back.
Mm.
Purely, I mean, it was amazing, but I think for a multitude of reasons. But one of the biggest reasons is that they actually did a reprise of Let It Go at the end.
Oh
And it wasn't
wow.
just Elsa singing it, it was the whole cast. So it really reinforced that notion of freedom and acceptance. And that idea of, you know, love and grace and acceptance intricately and inextricably woven into and part of our connections with other people.
That's brilliant. No, I definitely need to see it. I think I just want to mention as well, like, I like the metaphor of her creating the ice monster that chases everybody out of her
Yeah.
ice palace. In a bit of a metaphor for depression, in that we can also do really awful things when we're really depressed, in a really
Yes.
depressive state.
Mm-hmm.
But
We'll
it's
own
not.
that.
Yeah, me too. Um, it's not like she's created this monster, but it isn't her, and it's kind
Mm-hmm.
of her depression chasing everybody out. It's like just a perfect little analogy, which doesn't take accountability away from her
Mm-hmm.
because she did create it, but it's also acknowledging that it's not her intent to hurt people and chase
Yes.
people away. In
Mm-hmm.
her ideal world, she wouldn't be doing that, but it's
Yeah.
like that's an, I guess, an offshoot of the mental illness that she's
Mm-hmm.
experiencing.
Yes, and when you are in the midst of that, those thoughts and those feelings, as she was, like it feels like your option. It feels like you're keeping the people that you love safe,
Yes,
by keeping them
yes.
away from you. And I think Elsa felt like she was protecting the people that she loved by keeping herself away from them, because that is, at least for me, like one of the biggest lies that mental illness tells you.
Yes,
And so I
100%.
think, yeah, the fact that ultimately audiences, particularly young audiences, could see that for the lie that it is, and could see that ultimately, love and connection are possible for all of us, even as, we can push people away, even as we do kind of live alongside these lies. That is, yeah, also really, really powerful.
Yeah. I almost wonder, this might be a very, very big stretch, but her creating the ice palace for herself and freezing Arendelle
Mm-hmm.
is almost like a metaphor for suicide.
Mm.
She's chosen to isolate and sort of banish herself away
Mm-hmm.
from her family, and as a result, they are in like a forever winter, I guess,
Yeah.
perpetual winter. I'm definitely overthinking it, but that can be a little bit of a metaphor for how the impact of mental illness can be on people around, even if it's not necessarily suicide, but like cutting off your family.
Yes.
Like sometimes that can be having, I guess, estranging yourself from your family doesn't always have to be a negative thing, or sometimes it's a necessary thing. But in the case of
Mm-hmm.
when it's a depression or a mental illness creating that, it impacts your loved
Yeah.
ones in a way that can feel like what they've sort of created there, almost.
Yes. And I think on that notion of, I guess, suicide and the potential representation of that, the musical actually, like the Broadway musical, gives Elsa another song, and it's called Monster, and it's after she has kind of like banished Anna and Olaf, and she is actually saying, would they be better off without me? I'm a monster. So
Hmm.
it's kind of, it's explicitly acknowledging that, she is, and, would be having thoughts, that like the people that she loves are better off without her, that suicide is an option. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
and so I think it makes sense that, in a real life experience of mental illness like this, one's thoughts might then turn to suicide.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Definitely. I'm glad you somewhat agree, and I'm not just going a little bit on a tangent, but I
Mm.
guess it's the reality of mental illness,
Yes.
statistically and unfortunately. Is there anything else that we didn't touch on in terms of Anna, Elsa, the sort of depression, anxiety sort of metaphor?
The interesting thing that I noted is that, like, even before, Elsa kind of, like, accidentally hit Anna, like, their personalities were very different, in
Mm,
the sense
mm.
that, Elsa was asleep and Anna was the one waking her up.
Yeah.
And it was just kind of, it made me wonder about the, like, nature versus nurture kind of
Mm.
thing, in the sense that, obviously there's no real answer. We can't ever be like, this much is nature and this much is nurture. We can't do that in real life, and we can't do it in Frozen, but it did make me think that, you know, personality wise, there may well have been a disposition in Elsa for anxiety or depression,
Yeah.
that then, as a consequence of, you know, her environment, and, you know, her parents' interpretation of the troll's advice, kind of led to all of the ingredients, or like, yeah, created the recipe for the anxiety and depression that manifested.
That's a really good point, especially because when Anna was waking her up in that sort of first scene, she's also like really conscious of waking other people up in the palace. We've already, even before what
Yes.
happens, we can tell that she's a bit more of a cautious person than Anna. And
Mm-hmm.
Anna's definitely like the more playful, happy to take a risk sort of type all the way through the film,
Yes.
really.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a really good point.
Yeah, I just found that really interesting too, and almost like would love to just like sit down with like the filmmakers and just be like, here are all my questions.
I'm curious, in Frozen 2, is there any sort of backstory on the parents that we hear? Is there any more of a...
Yes,
Yeah.
a lot. So essentially, Frozen 2 is more about like indigeneity. So it turns out that Elsa and Anna's mum was like indigenous to like the forest near Arendelle.
Ah,
And she, Elsa and Anna's dad, like saved her at one point, and then like they fell in love, but she then had to leave like her like
her.
land.
Yeah.
And it was kind of all about the fact that like the colonizers of Arendelle kind of destroyed or impacted like the land and culture of the First Nations people of the
Oh,
forest.
wow.
So
I should definitely watch.
very
I've watched
powerful
it before today.
Yeah, it's very good. And at the same like time, like although there's not a lot of focus on mental illness, like yeah, one of the songs where Anna is experiencing particularly intense emotions, the next right thing is similarly kind of like, you know, when you do get overwhelmed by that sense of negativity, like sometimes the only thing you can do is, you know, take one step, one breath, and focus on, you know, the next step, the next breath, and then the one after that. And just
wow.
kind of that sense of immediacy and needing to break life down into the most manageable chunks because everything does feel so overwhelming.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think there's also like a couple of flashbacks to their childhood, you know, before the incident where Elsa's hit Anna, that reinforced that notion of their personality differences, and Elsa being like the more serious one, and Anna just kind of being like the playful, carefree one.
So I guess there's also some hints of that intergenerational trauma going on, or at least some of those habits that have come down through the generations of, having to manage really big things, but also having a responsibility to look after things while having to say goodbye to other things, I guess. And wow.
Yeah.
So many layers.
So many.
I wanted to briefly talk about Olaf before we move on, because he's such a beautiful character.
Yes.
And I kind of see him as like the antithesis of anxiety and depression, because he just sees everything for the joy and the beauty and excitement, like with completely rose-colored glasses, like, you know, oh look, I've been impaled, like just so happy about everything that happens to him. And I think it's important that she created him as well. Elsa created him even through this snowstorm, which is a really good message that, you know, even in your worst moments, the good things can come of it. Like you can create good things as well as the not so good things as well.
I guess also just that sense of joy in the small things, you know, like that he finds joy in, like, you know, getting a nose. You know, he finds joy in I guess like summer, even though he's like oblivious to the fact that summer could actually kill him. But just that notion that there is joy to be found everywhere is really, really powerful.
One of the lines he has is, "I never knew winter could be so beautiful," which I think is a really good line. There's beauty in everything, and there's creativity in everything too.
Yay, it just makes me so happy.
I also like that, like when he gets his own flurry, he's got his own little snow cloud, I feel like that's a bit of a metaphor of what it's like to live with depression. Like, you can't just delete depression. Like, it's
Yes.
manageable. Yep. Yeah. Like circumstantial depression, you might only have one experience of, but when it's linked very much with an anxiety disorder, you will always have that little cloud above your head.
Yes.
It's not, it's never going to go away. And particularly with anxiety, you can't delete anxiety because you also need it to protect yourself when there is a threat. So even if you could like remove your hippocampus or whatever, amygdala, you wouldn't, because it wouldn't be good. So you can experience joy. You can live in the world in the summer, but still have the winter there and function fine with work.
Yes. And also I think that notion that the way that we feel as individuals doesn't necessarily reflect the environment that's around us. So,
yes, that's a good point too,
like, Olaf might have been surrounded by summer, and I mean, this doesn't necessarily translate in terms of his mood and disposition, because as we've discussed, his disposition is, by necessity, that sense of positivity. But I guess what it can represent is that notion that, externally everything might be excellent. Within you and internally, there might be this cloud. This iciness, and that those things don't have to necessarily be, that cloud doesn't have to obscure everything. Duality exists. We are multidimensional in everything, but particularly in our emotional experiences.
It doesn't have to overwhelm you, but it can also have space to be there as well.
Yes.
You can give it the space and allow it to be there, which is the best way to manage it, really. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. You can kind of, like have that acceptance and hold it lightly. I guess that's something for me that I've kind of really been trying to hone in on and embrace, that notion of holding things lightly and not being wedded to or overly attached to I guess an idea or a part of my identity, because by giving whatever it is, like the anxious thought, power over me, like, as Elsa did when she was like giving the notion that she needed to be isolated so much power over her, it diminished her as a person. And so when it always comes back to let it go, but when she let that go, in much the same way as when I let go of or hold lightly the things that are hurting or weighing me down, then she and then I could be free, basically.
And it's a good metaphor for freezing that frozen heart, I guess, or that ice not being so dense and jagged and hard is holding it lightly, is letting that snow melt, letting that ice be there, but it be soft and fluffy rather than hard and jagged. I wish to interrupt this episode with just a little introduction to a trailer for the Vampire Insider podcast. Now, you may already be aware that the AMC series Interview with a Vampire has been around since last year, but what you might not be aware of is that ABC TV and ABC iView are currently screening and streaming the entire series, as well as the Mayfair Witches. So if you haven't already listened to this excellent podcast in which Christina, Mark and Joanne deeply dissect the Interview with the Vampire series as well as the Mayfair Witches, do not delay in listening to this fantastic podcast. And I'm not just saying that because I am in one of the episodes. The three hosts are hilarious, and it's an essential part of your viewing experience of the Interview with the Vampire series.
I feel like Sam Reed is in some way some sort of karmic salve for people who could never understand why the Tom Cruise played Lestat ever.
Greetings, Savory Inferiors. I'm Mark Snedeker, co-host of Vampire Insider. the unofficial podcast of AMC's Immortal Universe. Each week, I am joined by co-hosts Christina LaRusso and Joanne Palumbo as we analyze and recap the episodes, delve into Anne Rice's library, and engage in in-depth discussions of other works about the supernatural. Vampire Insider is available on all major platforms, so please invite us in.
Do you think there's any stereotypes in this film that might just dampen how much we love this film? Or anything that subverts it more than anything?
Yes, like as much as I love this film, I will be the first to admit that it is not perfect. And there are like several things that stood out to me and that still kind of stand out. Like that idea of like the Fixer-Upper song.
Yes.
I think
glad you mentioned that.
So I guess the song Fixer-Upper for me was something that suggested the notion that who we are as we are is enough for the people that love us. And that, yes, we're not perfect. Yes, we're all fixer-uppers and we've all got work to do on ourselves. And that we can be loved, while we do that work.
We can be flawed and still be a great catch.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. One line that stood out to me that I was always a little bit like, oh, that's a bit odd. And then also I saw a bunch of Tumblr posts about it. Well, there were two in that song. One was like the line, the thing with the reindeer that's a little outside of nature's laws. I was like, whoa, Disney, what are you going to what are you implying that Kristoff and Sven are getting up to? Like, what?
I missed that.
I was just like, wow, Disney, like totally did not need to go there.
No, that was definitely like for the adults if they noticed it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But okay, that's a bit, it's gone a bit far.
Yeah, I know, just a little bit. And then there's also this theory that I saw on Tumblr that I'm a bit dubious. But in the song Fixer-Upper, one of the trolls says, get the fiance out of the way and the whole thing will be fixed. And so I read like a fan theory that was like, Hans was never actually evil. The trolls just cursed him to get him out of the way that Kristoff and Anna would end up together. I don't believe that. But
I can see why people would make that conclusion, though.
Yes, yeah. But I think in terms of, I guess, like other stereotypes, we don't see like the reality of recovery being non-linear. Like in reality, it's not like Elsa is like, yes, I accept that my sister loves me. I accept myself. All is fine and dandy now. And I guess, again, this is a film. It's a Disney film. So it's going to operate within certain conventions. Yeah. But I think just acknowledging now that recovery isn't linear, that she is likely to have those setbacks and deal with and learn how to manage her thought patterns and learn how to regulate her emotions on an ongoing basis for the rest of her life.
Which I guess is good about Frozen 2 in the fact that we see her in another low point at one point. Yes. And yeah, I completely agree that they were my thoughts too. Like, as much as, the Fixer-Upper song is really about everyone's a fixer-upper, it was also kind of like, I interpreted that as, oh no, you can fix up Hans. Like that's what you can do here. You don't need to be fixed up, but he does. And it's like, women aren't here to fix up men. But yes. So I thought that was a little bit of a cop-out, but it's also, that message. Also the fact that in the, like one of the lines is the only fix for a fixer-upper is true love or something. Sometimes people just need to like focus on, like if for example, cognitive space, like the cognitive load for a woman is often higher than a man. Sometimes love isn't going to fix that. It's the man stepping up to the plate and but that's obviously a very personal thing for me.
But it's important and needs to be acknowledged. Like there are those systemic issues that love isn't going to fix.
And I guess on that note too, like what you're saying with mental illness as well, like yes, supportive family helps, but there's a lot of work involved and it does make it a little bit fear versus love, a bit binary.
Yes.
Which reminds me of Donnie Darko.
love that movie, I must say.
Yes, me too. Very much. But yeah, I think you're right. It's a little bit of a simplistic ending, but it is a Disney film, and that we can forgive them for that. I also thought that they could possibly interpret depression and anxiety and hence mental illness as a superpower, given that Elsa has powers, and that is the metaphor. And there sometimes can be a bit of danger in the trope that if you're mentally ill, then you must have like lots of creativity, and you'll make some really positive stuff out of that mental illness. Sometimes it's just shit, and there's lots of people with mental illness that aren't creative people, and that's okay. So there's that danger in seeing it, but I feel like you'd be interpreting a little bit too. Like it's a fantasy film, so of course there's going to be powers involved, and if it wasn't the power, then how would we have that metaphor? So
but still, it's kind of, again, holding those two ideas simultaneously.
Exactly.
And I think also something else that stuck out to me is that for the main characters, at least, you know, they were all very like all white, all stick thin.
Yes,
you know,
very pretty.
Mental illness does not discriminate. You know, I rewatched it the other day, and like, you know, there was the store owner,
yes,
like of Oaken Sauna, and he was like, you know, but his size was almost used as like a comedic thing, because he could throw Kristoff out of his shop. But then, you know, they had one like person who like was bowing to Elsa at the coronation, who was like not quite stick thin. But it's just kind of like, that's one person that you see for like 1 second. Like, come on, Disney, you can do more.
Yeah, that is commonly an issue. It's gotten a little bit better. Like, there's a few more heroines that aren't stick thin, like Encanto and Turning Red.
Yes, I was thinking.
But it's definitely done for comedic effect. Any different, like the mayor of Weaseltown is short and not very good looking, and has is balding. How dare! So it's definitely image used in that sort of way, and that is a very stereotypical. But yeah, I think mostly it subverts a lot of those Disney stereotypes. That's a bit more obvious than the stereotypes that it continues.
Yes. Yeah. Like, I think the one that like stood out to me most the first time I watched it, which we have already talked about a little bit, is that notion of like Kristoff actually calling out Anna and being like, you know, you can't marry a man you just met, and Anna being like, you can if it's true love. You know, Kristoff asking her like, you know, what's his last name, what's his favorite food, what's his whatever, to just really, I guess, gently point out that they don't really know each other.
Yeah, and that's a really important message. Get to know someone before you betroth yourself to them.
Yes.
And the true love in this film is actually family love. It's not romantic love. Not everyone can probably... It's not necessarily the family that you are born into. It might be the family that you've chosen, like you were saying earlier. But that is often the long-lasting supportive love that we actually need to help us.
Yeah.
I think we've kind of already talked about it, but should we sort of move on to whether there's anything harmful versus anything helpful? I think we've kind of talked about the potentially harmful things.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, we've sort of touched on that. One thing I also noticed is Olaf calls Kristoff crazy when he introduces them to the rocks. Didn't love that, particularly about a film about mental illness.
I know. I was like, come on, guys. Like, who vetted that? Like, seriously.
Maybe you could have just, that's right.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think everything else we really touched on. And given how popular this film is and how, like, even without me seeing it, I could see how helpful it was for the kids I was seeing. I think it's overwhelmingly more helpful than it is harmful.
Yeah, I agree.
I think one last thing I also think it's really important to acknowledge is her, even though Let It Go is about freedom, she really only finds that true freedom when she recognizes she deserves to be around people who love her as well. Yeah. Like, she shuts herself away from everyone because she thinks she deserves that. Yes. And she's able to, she probably controls them a little quicker than in would be happening in real life. But she's able to acknowledge that actually I'm not a burden. I'm a gift. I give people things as well, which is one of those things that you often feel when you're depressed, is you're a burden on everyone, and no one actually wants you around, and you don't deserve to have people in your life. So that's a really important message as well, that like it's just so important as a depiction, particularly having female focused and led and huge uses of metaphor, but also really, really catchy tunes.
Yes.
That to me, kids that watch this film are going to grow up and be really emotionally mature adults.
The mental health literacy. I love this for them.
Yes. Yeah. Which is something that, I'm in my 30s. I missed out on a little bit when I was growing up.
Yes.
There were some really great films and TV shows, but not as emotionally literate as something like Frozen.
Yes, like Frozen is like psychoeducation, like for children, which just, amazing.
But also adults too.
Psychoeducation for everyone.
For everyone. Anything else that you wanted to talk about in terms of whether it's helpful or harmful?
Yeah, just that for me personally, it's been enormously helpful in terms of both understanding my own mental illness internally and for myself, but also as a means of explaining that mental illness to other people. Ultimately it has been more helpful than harmful, but as always, I'm it's a nuanced thing, it's a subjective thing, and everyone's experiences will be different.
100%. Yeah, definitely. I love having media in which we can actually use therapeutically, but also be able to use as metaphors. So more of this is the answer. More films and representations of mental illness, disability, so that a kid who's struggling to articulate himself can be like, feeling a bit frozen today, or feeling like Elsa today, or I'm feeling more Olaf today. Like things like that are so powerful. So yeah, I'm glad it exists.
Me too. There's a film coming out on Disney Plus, I think next year, called Out of My Mind. And it's based on a book about a young girl with cerebral palsy. And I have cerebral palsy. Yeah, so I'm so excited for this film.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yes.
That'll be so groundbreaking, because that's a representation that's very few and far between, particularly for kids' films.
Yes. Yeah, so my soul is ready.
I might have to get you on to talk about that one.
Oh my God, yes.
Out.
I am so ready.
Yes, fantastic. It's funny though when things come out, we're more critical of it than other films, I guess, because there's a lot riding on that representation. So hopefully they nail it.
Yes. Yeah, I hope so too. What I have heard so far is that they have an actress with cerebral palsy who is a wheelchair user.
Fantastic.
Playing the main character, which I'm like, okay, good. First hurdle overcome. Come on, Disney, don't disappoint me with the rest.
Yes, please. It's funny that that seems like the most basic requirement to meet, but that's often so hard to see that.
It's not that hard, Hollywood. Come on. Lift your game, please.
So many options. Yeah. So I think we've touched on everything.
Yes.
I don't know if we need to go through final scores, because I think it meets all the criteria personally. Would you agree?
100% agree. Yes.
Even where there are some, flaws, it's it's well overtaken by all the positive aspects of it, for sure.
Absolutely. Yes.
Thank you so much for coming on to talk to me about Frozen. I kind of want to go and watch it again, but I have to wrap presents. Is there anything you'd like to plug? How can people find you on social media, for example?
Yeah, sure. So I'm on Twitter and Instagram as at thisgirl_writes. So THISGIRL_WRITES. And I have a blog where I review representation of mental illness and disability in literature called Laura's Adventures in Literature. So, yeah.
Fantastic. I'll pop them all in the show notes too, so everyone can click away and read all your awesome reviews.
Awesome.
Thank you so much for joining me, and I'm very excited to talk with you again in future.
Thank you so much. Yay Frozen and yay Psychocinematic.
Thank you so much. This podcast is not designed to be therapeutic, prescriptive, or constitute a formal diagnosis for any listener. For a longer version of this disclaimer, please check the episode notes on your podcast app.